doesn't just compress the image. So basically, you have to shoot on RAW, not JPEG. JPEG, it just reduces the image quality and just edits the pic in just itself. So you must shoot RAW. Next thing is focusing at infinity. This is very important point because during night you cannot during the daytime it is very easy to focus on anything. If you are focusing manually, just you have to rotate the lens and just focus manually. But during the night time it is very difficult because the stars, they are very far away and it is very difficult to focus. So how to focus during that time? During that time you have to focus at infinity, and it can be done with the help of, you can just you have to look at a star which has very high brightness. I mean, the star which is quite easily visible. So just point your camera towards that star, then just zoom in the zoom from the your backlit screen, and just try to focus on that star. And what you have to do while focusing, you have to make that dot appear, you have to make that star appear as a dot, the smallest dot possible. So first it will be big, then its size will start decreasing, and then at a particular point of time it will just do like uh, its size will start increasing again. So at that time you have to just lock up your lens. I mean that is the basically the focus point in which all the stars and the Milky Way will be at focus when the star will be of minimum size. So this is how we focus at infinity, or we focus during the night. Next thing is using the ISO. So ISO basically it just makes your camera sensitive towards it is basically the sensitivity of the camera towards light. So the lower the ISO, the lower is the sensitivity of the camera towards light. The higher is the ISO, the higher is the sensitivity of the camera towards light. So basically, since the stars are very dim, they emit they emit a lot of light, but actually the very less amount of light is able to reach us because they are very far away from us. So we have to use a very high ISO. You have to use around more than 2000 ISO, and you can go up to 6400. And if you have a very good DSLR like some Canon 5D, Canon 1D, which are full frame DSLRs, then you can even shoot the ISO higher up to 800, and even the ISO even shoots up to 1 lakh. But if you have a low end camera, like my camera is basically a crop sensor camera, so I cannot go beyond 3200 because after that a lot of grains start appearing in the picture. Now what are grains? Grains are basically some white dots which start appearing in a picture, which appears due to the high ISO. So the higher the ISO, the higher the number of grains. So you have to keep the ISO at a particular level so that it doesn't introduce a number of a very large number of grains, and simultaneously it should make the pic look very beautiful. So this is what so you have to keep the ISO between 2000 to 6400. Next is aperture. So what is aperture? Aperture is basically the opening of the lens, which allows the light to enter through the lens. Aperture, you can basically think it like the iris of the camera. So what the iris does in our eye, it just allows the light, it just controls the amount of light entering our eye. So it just contracts the pupil whenever a lot of light is there, and it just expands the pupil when there is low light. So similarly, the aperture, or what is how the aperture is controlled in a camera, it is given by a number known as f number, or basically f stop. So the smaller is the f number, the wider is the aperture. So basically, if you are seeing that a number f 3.5 is written, so the 3.5 is basically it is getting divided in the f number. So f over 3.5, it is creating a wide aperture. So the wider the aperture, the more the light can enter the camera, so the better is the pic. And since I just use the kit lens, I only have the kit lens for astrophotography. So the maximum aperture available on a kit lens is f 3.5. So all of my pics, they have been clicked on, all of my background pics, the sky pics have been clicked in the f number f 3.5. And the next time is exposure time. Now what is exposure time? People also call it shutter speed, but we also used to call it exposure time. Now what exposure time is basically how long you have to expose your camera, your lens, to your sensor, basically your sense, how long you have to expose the sensor of your camera to the stars, or basically to whatever the subject you are focusing into. So for the Milky Way photography, it can go from, you have to go from 10 to 30 seconds depending on your goal. Now in the next point I have written, if you want sharper stars, then you have to use, if you want sharper stars, if you want to get your photo printed, if you want to just get it photo framed on a wall, if you want to get print of that photograph, then you have to use the shutter speed of around 10 to 15 seconds. And if you don't want any prints, if you just want a very bright looking image and very nice looking image, but you don't want to zoom that pic and you don't want to print that pic, then you can go for 30-second long exposure. Now what is the disadvantage of 30-second long exposure? It basically, during that time the stars, they start trailing. Now what is meant by trailing? Trailing is basically moving. Now since the earth is moving, so the stars, they tend to move around the different direction with respect to earth. So if you just keep your shutter speed very high, such as like 25 or 30 seconds, then the stars will start trailing. And if you just zoom in the pic, then you will see some, the stars, they don't appear like a bright spots, they just appear like a small lines. But it only appears while zooming. So so this is the basically the disadvantage of long exposures. But but in my case, since the maximum aperture available is f3.5, so I use 30-second exposure, since I don't want to get prints out of my photographs. So I just use 30-second exposure because the image is quite bright and it allows a lot of more amount of light to enter rather than a 10 or 15-second exposure. Last is the cable release. So you have to use the cable release during the Milky Way photography, as I told earlier, to prevent the camera shake, because while clicking the shutter button, it just introduces some camera shake. So it is quite, it gets quite bad quick, I mean. So next is foreground addition. So what is basically foreground? Foreground is any object which is in front of the sky image or which is in front of the Milky Way. So different type of foregrounds can be added. They may be, I mean, you can just think of your own, think on your own, like trees, mountains, hut, car, architecture, any animal. No, not any animal. The animal will start moving, but anything which is static, this can be added into a foreground. So actually, if we click a single photograph, then with the foreground, then the foreground will be very grainy because of extremely high ISO, and that high ISO, it results in grains in the foreground. So we don't want that grains in the foreground. That's why we have to use a procedure called stacking and blending. So what does so in the right side of this slide, I have written how to add the foreground. So the first point is using moonlit foreground at lower ISO and very long exposure time. So basically, what you do uh, in this thing is basically, when the moon is up in the sky, then just assume you want a tree as your foreground. So just use the light emitted from the moon, basically the sunlight reflected from the moon, to fall on that tree. And you use the lower ISO, such as like I've given over here, ISO 400, and 5 minutes of exposure time. So this amount of exposure time, it allows the image of that tree or that foreground to be very sharp. And the lower amount of ISO, 400 ISO, it results in better quality of the foreground. I mean, it doesn't introduce any kind of noise. Second point is artificially lighting up the foreground using some low intensity light. This is basically, it cannot be done by us. It is mostly done by the professional photographers. They take just artificial lights with them, LED lights of lower intensity, and they just keep it in front of their foreground, and thus then they keep the foreground. Third point is light painting the foreground with the powerful torch. Now what is light painting is basically, you have to take a very powerful torch. Now again, I'm assuming the foreground to be a tree. So we have to just use the, as just as we click the shutter button of the camera, we have to just use a torch and just shake it over the whole tree, so that just it lights up the whole tree, so that the image of the tree is just in front of the camera. I mean, the light from every part of the tree reaches the camera, so that the tree is visible as a whole. The next thing is capturing the foreground during blue hours. Now this is one of the most important thing which I have done with my photographs, capturing the foreground during blue hours. Now what is a blue hour? It is basically a time just after, basically just after dawn and just before morning, early morning. just after dawn and just before early morning, when there's just very light pale blue light is coming, and at that time you have to use very long exposure time, like 2 to 3 minutes to expose your foreground to click a pic of the foreground. And the last point is, so when we just click the foreground, then we have to finally blend the image of the foreground with the sky image in Adobe Photoshop, or mostly it is done on Adobe Photoshop. So next thing is post processing. Now, actually, the post processing is quite is a very big topic. So I have just written about the basic softwares which are used to do the post processing. If you want to know more about post processing, you can just ask me. And so basically, post processing is mainly done on Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Lightroom. And the stacking. Now, what is stacking? Stacking is basically putting one photograph over another so that it creates high resolution, high quality image along with decreasing the amount of grains. So and stacking can be done with different programs like Sequator. It is available in Windows. Second one is Landscape Stacker. It is available only for Mac users. And third one is Adobe Photoshop. And stacking in Adobe Photoshop is extremely difficult because it has to be done manually, as the Adobe Photoshop is not able to align it all the images properly. So just a small note that all these background pics in these slides were captured by me during these Corona holidays after around, I think, 15th of March 2020, during the lockdown period, from the terrace of my home and from some other places during Unlockdown 1.0. And the location is Chamba City, Himachal Pradesh. And this is my IG account. So thank you everyone, and thank you IBAC for giving me this opportunity. And I hope that it was a bit interesting. At least the pics in the background should be interesting. So this is how I conclude this topic. And so now I'm ready for the questions. Hello.
Thank you for a great talk. So now we have concluded and questions are welcome. So audience can ask questions to the speaker now.
There's questions in the chat as well. If you can.
Okay. Okay. Uh, okay. This background for Part Bria. This all these pics they have been clicked by me. And next is the question of Rushi. Uh, Actually, Secretary is a very good option because it is very easy to use. I also just try to use DSS, but Deep Sky Stacker, it is very difficult to use. That because you have to use a lot of images, like you have to use the bias images, dark frames, light frames, and a lot of work has to be done. So just to reduce that amount of work, I just use Secretary. Yes, you can use DSS for that purpose. Actually, I tried to this. The question of Kevin Kumar. Uh, I I just wanted to click this comet, which the comet near was, which is just going on these days. I mean, which is just revolving around our solar system these days. I just want to click that, but nowadays, since the monsoon has arrived in in my city, so I'm not able to click that, and I cannot try to click the planets because it requires a very long lens. Basically, the telephoto lens, it requires like 600 focal length. So I cannot try to click the planets. Any idea for Linux? No, sir, I don't have any idea for Linux. Yeah, I have also seen this GIMP or whatever it is. I just tried, but I think the free editing software, you can just download Adobe Photoshop. You can download Adobe Lightroom from any site for free. And basically for this editing software, the Adobe Photoshop is the best. Adobe Lightroom is the best. And if you want to go further, if you want to just want your Milky Way to pop out even more, then you should try to do stacking, not in this starry landscape